Hello everybody. So for chapter 10, will not be so much of as a lecture as a, hey, make sure you go study this kind of chapter. We had one of those before already, so there's not much to this other than me telling you what you need to memorize and study, and what videos to watch. I can't show the videos in this recording. It doesn't work very well, so every time we get to one of those, basically make sure that you go in and review those on the PowerPoint that is uploaded so that you can get that, and also using the typed notes out will help you follow along as well. So a lot of this is just going to be muscles and their actions and interactions. So muscle tissue we talked about before consists of skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. And this chapter focuses on how they interact to bring movement, the criteria for naming, principles of leverage, so that whole memorization aspect that I'm sure everyone knew was coming. One thing I want to say is muscles can only pull, they can never push. So what one muscle group does, another undoes. So there's three main functional groups: the prime mover, the agonist, major responsibility for producing that specific movement, and then the antagonist, that it opposes or reverses as a particular movement of something else. So the prime mover and the antagonist are located on opposite sides of the joint across which they act. The center just helps prime movers, so they add extra force to the same movement, reduces undesirable or unnecessary movement. Fixators, they're a type of synergist that immobilizes bone at the muscle's origin rather than enhancing the movement of the prime mover. So it gives the prime mover stable base on which to act. So the same muscles may act as a prime mover in one movement, an antagonist for a different movement, and a synergist for a third movement. So those are interchangeable. One thing, and this whole chapter is about memorization and naming muscles. So there's different ways muscles are named. Their location, where their region are, their shape, what their shape is, such as the deltoid means triangle, muscle size, whether something is large, such as maximus, or small, such as minimus. We can also name on the direction of the muscle fibers, such as rectus means run straight, transversus at right angles, and so on. We can also name as the number of origins. So biceps have 2 origins, triceps have 3 origins. We can also name based on location. So basically where it attaches to, where its insertion is. We can also name on action, such as a flexor and extensor. You can also combine several criteria, like as the extensor carpa radialis longus. Extensor extends, carpi is wrist, radialis radius, and longus is long. So you can combine those together. So these are the fascicle arrangements that you will need to know. Here's them specifically. A lot of the arrangements are circular. They can be convergent, and of course where they're located. Fusiform, parallel, multipinnate, bipinnate, unipinnate. And so most common are circular, convergent, parallel, fusiform, and pinnate. These fascicles determine the range of motion, so they are very, very important. That's the amount of movement when the muscle shortens. So fascicles determine that muscle power. Long fibers, more parallel to the long axis, shorten more, usually not powerful. So power depends on the number of muscle fibers. Bipinnate, multipinnate muscles have most fibers. They shorten little, but are powerful. Lever systems are important. I believe in the last chapter I mentioned that most skeletal muscles use leverage, and it's important to understand physics. And this is why, because it's a lever system. So the components of a lever system is the lever. It's a rigid bar. In this case, for anatomy, it's our bone. And it's on a fixed point called a fulcrum. And in anatomy, a fulcrum is our joint. Effort is a force applied. So it's supplied by the muscle contraction that we have, and it's applied to the lever to move that resistance or the load. And the load is just a resistance. So that's the bone, the tissues, and any added weight moved by that effort. There are over 600 muscles, and they are grouped by function and location. So you're going to see that throughout this chapter. And so I'm going to breeze through 600 and some muscles here that I'm going to tell you how to memorize. It's not that I can lecture on them because I can't really, you just have to get in and learn them. So the muscle tables that you will have in your text include the description, which includes the location relative to other muscles, its origin and insertion points, the actions it performs, and its innervation. So not only are there 600 muscles, but there's these things to learn as well along with those. So some tips to learn muscles. Be aware of information learned from the muscle's name. Primary key thing. Read the description in a table. Identify the muscle on the figure that helps you relate location and description together. And relate the muscle's location and attachments to its actions. Act out movements on yourself. I think you heard me in the last chapter when I asked you to envision or try to do a bicep curl, and I said I was doing it too. So even when I'm talking to you, and even though I know these, I do that action too, it helps my brain remember things. It helps me know what action's being done. And then another thing to add to this is I think group studying really helps. So if there's anyone in the class that you can study with, I think that's a really good time to get together to, even if it's online, you create, a Zoom or something to chat with each other to learn. That's really, really helpful. Okay, so this is going to go quick. There's 214 slides, over 600 muscles, and I'm just telling you what you need to memorize. So it's a lot. So just try to break it down into section like it's sort of broken in section on here. So these are the superficial muscles of the body that you do need to know. It's the anterior view and the posterior view. Make sure you know those. Also, muscles of the head and facial expression are important. Facial expressions are different because they insert into skin, not bone. So that's important to remember. They are innervated by cranial nerve 7. That's the facial nerve. So basically, we need to know both groups, muscles of the scalp and muscles of the face. Here's a lateral view of the scalp, face, and neck, and the cartoon image of this one here, making sure you know each one of those. Muscle used in facial expressions are also important, so you can see what they look like. You can perform each of these so you can feel what your muscle is doing with different facial expressions. Another thing that we need to know is the muscles of mastication or chewing. So there are 4 pairs of all innervated by cranial nerve 5. They're the prime movers, the jaw closure, the temporalis, and the masseter. So making sure that you know those, understanding that the muscles promoting tongue movements are different as well. So making sure you know those 3 extrinsic muscles that anchor and move the tongue. So here is that that you need to know. And of course, in a different vision there. And of course, with that mouth and tongue open and tongue extended and what that looks like. Again, as I've said in previous chapters, I can't play this so that you would hear it. And it doesn't work well. So make sure you go into your PowerPoints that are loaded for you or even mastering to see and watch each of these flicks. So making sure you are going through each one of those. Knowing the muscles of the anterior neck and throat used in swallowing is essential as well. There it is on the cadaver. And of course, making sure you see the anterior neck there. Looking at each of the muscles on those A&P flicks. Continuing with the muscles of the head and neck. Making sure you understand each of those. All moving down the vertebral column. There's that on the cadaver and what each one of those looks like. Continuing through the vertebral column. The next section is looking at the deep muscles of the thorax. So breathing. So there's 2 phases of breathing. There's inspiration or inhaling, or expiration, exhaling. Inspiratory muscles, they include the diaphragm and the external intercostals. So contraction of these muscles enlarges the rib cage, and the diaphragm divides the thoracic and abdominal cavities. So expiration, brought on by relaxation of these inspiratory muscles, as well as the contraction of the internal intercostals. So basically, the relaxation of those muscles decreases the size of the rib cage. So there's the muscles of respiration, and basically looking at the internal and external intercostal. And of course, making sure you understand each of these muscles of respiration. Of course, that's the cadaver view. And watching each of these A&P flicks. You also need to know the muscles of the abdominal wall. And of course, here is more images of those muscles of the abdominal wall, making sure that you are checking out the flicks. Also, muscles of the pelvic floor and the perineum, it's important to know. So the muscles of the urogenital diaphragm, basically the anterior half of the perineum inferior to the pelvic floor, there's deep transverse perineal muscle, and it contains this external urethral sphincter, so the voluntary control of urination. So making sure you know the muscles of the pelvic floor and the perineum. Those are really important. And of course, here, the difference between male and female. It is also important to know the muscles of the thorax and shoulder that act on the scapula and the arm. There's the cadaver view, and of course, the A&P flicks for those. Continuing on, looking at the muscles acting on the scapula and arm, cadaver view as well, and of course, the videos associated with that. In addition, you need to know the muscles that crossing the shoulder joint, so the movements of the humerus, or the arm, specifically the humerus. There are 9 muscles that cross that shoulder joint. They insert on and move the humerus. Some originate from the scapula, but the others originate from the axial skeleton, so it's really important to know the origin sites for these. Actions include flexion, extension, and abduction. And of course, there's 3 prime movers of the arm, the pectoralis major, the latissimus dorsi, and the deltoid. And then, of course, rotator cuff muscles are important, so making sure you understand those. So each of these have a flicks associated with them, making sure that you are watching, learning, and memorizing those. Again, continuing looking at the shoulder and elbow joints on the arm and forearm respectively. And of course, how those move about. Making sure that you are looking at the A&P flicks for each of those so that you can memorize each one of those as we kind of go through. Continuing with this muscles crossing the shoulder and elbow, more of those muscles that act upon those areas. So making sure that you're looking at each one of those. And there's a lot of them. And then, of course, looking at the anterior fascicle compartment of the forearm, acting on the right wrist and fingers, making sure you understand each one of those, and the videos that are associated with those. So again, you're looking through each section. Again, same thing here, posterior compartment here, and looking at each one of those videos. So you can see it's divided by section. My suggestion is take each section at a time as you're memorizing them. And then, of course, making sure you understand the intrinsic muscles of the hand and the movements that occur within each of those. And so here are those muscles of the hand, second layer as well. And so you can see the different layers associated with that and those dorsal intercostals that are located there. Moving on to the hip and knee joints, the movements of the thigh and leg. They are grouped according to anterior, medial, or posterior. Most anterior muscles flex the femur at the hip and extend the leg at the knee. That's that foreswing in walking. And most posterior muscles extend high, so flex the leg. That's a backswing of walking. So the medial muscles all abduct thigh. The 3 groups are enclosed by the fascia lata. And so it's important to know all of the thigh flexors that pass in front of the hip joint and the thigh extensors. And so, of course, these are the anterior and medial muscles promoting movements in the thigh and leg, and making sure you know those. And each of those movements that are going to lead to the structures in these areas. These are the posterior muscles of the right hip and thigh, making sure you know each one of those. There it is on the cadaver as well. And, of course, making sure you look at each one of those and memorizing those video flicks. Posterior muscles to the right hip and thigh, you can see those as well, making sure that you look at each one of those in different layers. Again, there's the cadaver version of that, and making sure you're making it through each one of those. So there's a lot there too. And then, of course, the compartment of the right leg. You can see each layer here and each muscle associated that you need to know from there. Muscles of the lateral compartment of the right leg, you can see associated there, and making sure you're memorizing each of those. The posterior compartment is located here. And then, of course, there is each one of those. So making sure that you're going through and memorizing these. I know, oh, and sorry, I jumped ahead. Muscles of the right foot, making sure you know those. This first layer, here is second layer, and third layer, and fourth layer. And this is the dorsal aspect of the fourth layer. So making sure that you're seeing each of the compartments of those legs, the feet, and understanding each one of those muscles. So I know that was a quick run through of what you need to know. You do have them in the notes in the textbook as well. This is a very difficult part of anatomy, and I totally understand, and I'm here for you for that. It just takes a lot of time to sit and learn them. Luckily, in the way I designed the class, it's not a complete punishment to miss a few. So if you don't get them all, I do allow you to retake homework up to 5 times and quizzes twice. So that should be helpful in helping you process that information. And I would also suggest that any activities that we have and videos I have posted for you, this is the time to, if you don't use them already, now is the time to start utilizing them. Otherwise, utilize all those resources, but if you have any questions, please reach out because I'm always happy to help. And of course, I will see you in the next chapter.